Signor Presidente,
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to offer my congratulations to Mr. Philemon Yang of the Republic of Cameroon on his election as President of the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly. I wish him much success in a very complex international context. I also congratulate his predecessor, Mr. Denis Francis, for the results achieved during his term. To Secretary General Antonio Guterres, I express our acknowledgement of his deep commitment to the service of our common ideals and goals in a very difficult international landscape. The world faces grave challenges. The obligation to follow the principles and deliver on the promises of the United Nations Charter is the burden that each one of us carries. We witness devastating wars, the intensification of regional tensions, and other grave threats to international peace and security. Hundreds of millions of people continue to live in extreme poverty, without the basic means of subsistence, without hope for a better future, without human dignity. It's becoming even more urgent to implement reforms in global economic and financial governance, to make it more just, inclusive, and equitable. This is the only way to build adequate responses to the challenges that humanity faces. We must fight more efficiently against poverty and social exclusion through concrete actions. Specifically, we must strive to finance development programs, reduce inequalities, protect the environment, and mitigate the effects of climate change. Mr. President, 8 decades after the establishment of the UN in 1945, we live today in a totally different world. We continue to call for reform of the United Nations Security Council, which must consider the interests of Africa under the terms of the Ezulwini Consensus and the Sirte Declarations of Heads of State and Government of the African Union. We must reform the international financial architecture in order to promote greater inclusion, particularly in Africa, and to consider the African continent's role and contribution to the world economy. In this context, we welcome the Summit of the Future. We hope that the Compact for the Future can drive collective efforts to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, and Agenda 2063, the Africa we want, of the African Union. As a member of the Global Working Group on Social Protection for Nutrition, Human Capital and Local Economic Development of the Group of 7+, G7+, we will work together with the other distinguished members on eradicating hunger and progressively achieving all Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs. Mr. President, the President of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau, we are committed to fostering dialogue, national reconciliation, consolidation of democracy and the rule of law, as well as our country's sustainable development. Despite the negative impact of the challenging world economic and financial situation, the economy of Guinea-Bissau continues to grow as a result of sound public policies. The practice of accountability has provided greater transparency in the state's economic and financial management. We have adopted measures that though difficult, were shown to be necessary to drive the private sector and to create a more solid foundation for an economy that is dynamic and inclusive. We are promoting greater participation of women and youth entrepreneurs. We are investing on building and improvement of basic infrastructure, such as roads and other projects. We declared war on corruption and organized crime. We were able to restore trust in our relations with international financial institutions and other bilateral and multilateral partners. We continue to place faith in strengthening Guinea-Bissau's bonds of friendship and cooperation with the world. We remain steadfast on the policy of peace building and peaceful resolution of conflicts in West Africa and in the world in general. It was to this end that in recent months I made visits of friendship and work to Russia, Ukraine, Israel, and Palestine. In this context, I reiterate my call for an end to the unjust and very harmful embargo that our brothers and sisters in Cuba have been subjected for decades. Mr. President, distinguished heads of state and government, ladies and gentlemen, I recently had the honor of serving Africa as president of the Alliance of African Leaders for Malaria. We made significant progress in a very difficult world environment. We endeavored to garner support to replenish the global fund. We worked with the private sector to promote the production of drugs and nets to combat malaria. We encouraged the transfer of technologies to African companies. We launched End Malaria Councils and funds and supported youth movements against malaria. Despite all the progress achieved, challenges persist. In the next 2 years, ALMA will run a $1.5 billion deficit. Global warming and rains associated with climate change are expanding. The geographic reach of mosquitoes, thus exposing more than 170 million people to the threat of malaria in the African continent. I take this opportunity to congratulate the Executive Secretariat of ALMA for their remarkable service. I also thank all of ALMA's partners for their crucial support in the fight against malaria during my term in office. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I would like, on behalf of the population of Republic of Guinea-Bissau and my own, I would like to reaffirm our determination to continue to contribute to strengthening the friendship among countries and peoples, to promote international cooperation, multilateralism, the peaceful resolution of conflicts, the end of wars and suffering of innocent populations, to hold peace in the world. I thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Guinea-Bissau. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Jose Maria Pereira Neves, President of the Republic of Cabo Verde. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Excelências,
Excellencies, numerous armed conflicts continue to ravage various regions of the world with devastating impacts on the populations, particularly in the Middle East, where the potential for escalation and risk of spreading are all too evident. Innocent lives are lost daily in an unrelenting and merciless cycle of violence. We urge all parties involved, alongside the international community and relevant organizations, to spare no effort to put an end to these conflicts, to commit to dialogue and uphold the values enshrined in the United Nations Charter, international law, and humanitarian law, thus allowing the gradual return to normalcy and the possibility of building a future free from the present day destruction and indiscriminate death. Excellencies, at the national level, we remain committed to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda, and the African Union Agenda 2063. We are also focused on implementing policies toward ensuring universal access to quality education and healthcare, and on fully integrating the youth into all spheres of social, economic, and political life, ensuring that future generations are equipped with the tools they need to tackle global challenges. This year, we proudly received a certification from the World Health Organization as a malaria-free country, a comforting and encouraging testament to our commitment to health and healthcare as a fundamental right for all. While many nations, especially in Africa, are still grappling with this terrible disease, we have a unique opportunity to eradicate preventable and treatable ailments that have long plagued humanity, causing suffering, hindering progress, and trapping millions in poverty. To achieve this goal, I call on the upcoming IDA 21 Global Fund restructuring meeting to be held in Paris next month to prioritize funding through a dedicated budget line aimed at eliminating diseases. Microbial pathogens and antimicrobial resistance also pose significant threats to global health. Thus, understanding and managing microbial activity is crucial for addressing challenges related to disease control, food security, environmental conservation, and climate change. In this troubled and challenging international landscape, where multiple crises continue to impact people and the planet, I reaffirm Cabo Verde's firm commitment to being an active and constructive member of the United Nations and tirelessly championing the universal values contained in its charter. Among these crises, climate change disproportionately affects vulnerable nations, especially small island developing states, SIDS. We look to COP29 to yield urgent and tangible progress on key climate issues, particularly as the deadline for significant emissions reductions approaches. Our people, especially communities in small island developing states, seek bolder commitments, namely, namely from high emission countries, and swift implementation of climate policies and funding mechanisms that are not only ambitious, but also equitable and effective. The rising sea levels, also caused by climate change, require immediate and special attention. The challenge is multidimensional and extends far beyond island and coastal populations. It affects all continents and regions, leaving no one immune to this catastrophe in the making. We therefore welcome today's high-level meeting on addressing the existential threats posed by sea level rise. Last year, on the sidelines of the 78th General Assembly, the agreement on biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction was opened for signature, representing an international milestone in the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction, that is, in the high seas, which constitute about 60% of the world's oceans. And I am proud to say that Cabo Verde, my country, signed this agreement on its first day and is currently finalizing the ratification process. I call on all nations who have not yet done so to also sign and ratify this important instrument for the conservation of life in our oceans. As an ocean nation, Cabo Verde has a tiny land territory in comparison to the immensity of its maritime territory. Therefore, I did not hesitate to accept UNESCO's honorable invitation to become patron of the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science Alliance for Sustainable Development for 2021-2023. As an ocean nation, heavily dependent on marine resources, our role in the Ocean Decade focuses on local and global actions to promote sustainable ocean management. We have been focused on the importance of sustainable ocean management, particularly for small island developing states that are very vulnerable to climate change and the degradation of marine ecosystems. For 3 consecutive years, we have hosted international ocean conferences to foster partnerships between governments, the private sector, scientists, and civil society to advance ocean science and create innovative solutions to ocean challenges. Thus, it is important to bring together key stakeholders in order to boost collaborative solutions for the oceans, help develop research capacities to study the impact of climate change, ocean acidification, and promote knowledge sharing and technology transfer to improve ocean monitoring and observation systems. The fourth United Nations Conference on Small Island Developing States, SIDS, was successfully held last month of May. However, to ensure greater resilience and sustainability of small island developing states, we must urgently begin implementing the Antigua and Barbuda Plan of Action. Cabo Verde remains committed to playing an active role within the SIDS community, and in the first quarter of 2025, we will host a high-level meeting for the Atlantic, Indian, and South China Sea regions aimed at establishing a coordination mechanism for the subregion. At the SIDS-4 conference, we also expressed our readiness to host the 5th United Nations Conference on SIDS in 2034. As a small island developing state, we face substantial challenges that affect our macroeconomic systems. Even if we dedicated our entire state budget to sustainable development and climate action, it would still fall short of the necessary funding targets. In most small island developing states, this situation is exacerbated by a significant lack of capacity to navigate new financial tools. While reforms to the global financial architecture evolve slowly, there is an urgent need to accelerate development processes. We must swiftly and significantly scale up technical assistance and capacity building efforts in financing sustainable development to ensure that the global south is not left behind. We here welcome the recent approval of the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index, MVI, which is crucial, particularly for SIDS and other vulnerable groups, as it provides a comprehensive and differentiated way of assessing our development needs and challenges, thus enabling a broader and more accurate understanding of how various factors influence the development of countries. In my capacity as the African Union champion for natural and cultural heritage, and in line with the policies of the government of Cabo Verde, I have been tirelessly advocating for the protection, promotion, and sustainable management of Africa's rich natural and cultural heritage, which is highly vulnerable to climate change. It is essential that we continue to raise awareness on the need to safeguard our ecosystems, historical landmarks, traditional knowledge, and intangible cultural practices. It is thus urgent for us to promote African identity through the promotion of African languages, traditional arts, and all the plurality of cultural expressions, reinforcing the continent's diverse cultural history and its contributions to global culture and human heritage is vital. The restitution of cultural assets, such as artifacts, works of art, and sacred objects, which are an integral part of the cultural identity, history, and traditions of the communities from which they originate, is of vital importance not only for Africa, but for many other regions of the world. Their removal has disrupted cultural continuity, and their return would allow preserving their cultural and spiritual integrity as they are returned to their original environments, thus allowing local communities to reconnect with their heritage, fostering cultural pride, and preserving their identities for future generations. I am pleased to announce that in 2025, we will host a high-level meeting in Cabo Verde focused on Atlantic Creoleness, or the Atlantic dimension of Creole, bringing together scholars of Creole languages, artists, writers, filmmakers, men and women of culture, and world leaders. They will represent the plurality of geographical spaces of affirmation of Atlantic dimension of Creole, a construction of which Africans and their descendants were an integral part of. This meeting in 2025 aims to enhance initiatives like the Slave Route Project and the Decade of People of African Descent, as well as the United Nations Conference on Racism held in Durban in 2001. Our intention is to debate and praise Creole, the dimension of Creole, as a complex and very rich reality, the result of human relationships woven between peoples of the various peri-Atlantic continents during the ocean navigations that began in the 15th century. From these encounters, new forms of culture and organization of society emerged and lasted over time, representing a particularly fruitful moment of social and cultural innovation. These will be, therefore, intense days of academic and scientific reflection, but also of artistic demonstration, cultural exchange, and reconnection, from the performing arts to Creole cuisine, to handicrafts, to music. There will also be, of course, days of strategic political debate among decision makers on the dialogue between peoples and cultures and on the peace and the future of humanity. Thank you for your attention.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Cabo Verde. The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Iris Samara Castro Sarmiento, President of the Republic of Honduras. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency and invite her to address the Assembly.
Señor presidente,
President of the General Assembly, United Nations Secretary General, distinguished presidents, prime ministers, and dignitaries representing the countries of this great assembly of the United Nations. I speak to you from this rostrum as President of Honduras, as the representative of a people who have resisted oppression, exploitation, and structural violence imposed against us for centuries. Today, I am threatened by the same forces of capital that 15 years ago perpetrated a coup d'etat against President Manuel Zelaya. I called out this new conspiracy in the streets during the huge gatherings of people that took place on the 14th and 15th of September, our country's Independence Day. I'm being threatened because I have brought in structural changes to the economic model, and because I have called out the unfair taxation regime that perpetuates inequalities, that gives to the most powerful and that exploits the poorest. Our sovereignty is the fundamental basis and undeniable principle of international relations. However, in Honduras, they continue to impose colonial practices, interference, economic, media, and political domination against us. Supranational powers and some multinational corporations are the result of corrupt public-private elites that have no other goal than to increase their capital. Globalization has failed in its mission to bring prosperity to people. Its results lay bare the concentration of wealth in the most rich countries and among the elites, whilst at the same time the working class is cast aside and forced to migrate in order to survive. At this assembly, the majority of leaders from Latin America and the Caribbean have called out global capitalism as the main factor responsible for the destruction of natural resources and as the oppressor of the conditions of life of humanity. Accumulation of economic gain prevails above human interest, and the role of international financial bodies with their loans with conditions attached to them and fiscal and financial income are things that only aggravate the situation of poverty and dependency of our countries. Neoliberal privatization policies continue to weaken people's access to services, like services of water and energy, health services, education, work, social security. Free trade agreements imposed against our peoples undermine our sovereignty and remove the ability of our producers to compete on an equal footing, causing the cost of living to increase on a daily basis. Peace, justice, freedom, and democracy remain foundational values of our country. Therefore, we cannot accept them being held hostage by the 10 most powerful families in Honduras, who are the ones that have grabbed our main economic resources and that are refusing to accept the changes that I'm bringing in. We need to strengthen our democratic system through popular consultations and through the real, direct, and effective participation of our people. The International Model Cities Project, the ZEDE project, that was selling off chunks of our country as a loot, really, for multinational capital. And that was something that was supported by stakeholders in the previous narco regime, has been cancelled definitively by my social democratic government. Today, I wish to express my gratitude to the Supreme Court of Justice for its historic ruling, and also to the National Congress for their support. I have called out the International Centre for Settlement of Investment Disputes, the ICSID, because it is an unfair system of arbitration where private interests prevail above the interests of nation states. Over the last 2 years and 8 months, I have brought in a structural reform to return to a single treasury account for our country, cancelling a scheme of corruption that was built around the setting up of trusts that were used to loot the resources of the state. Thanks to us dismantling the scheme of corruption, I am now able to help boys and girls, children, in all of the schools of Honduras. And now, thanks to that, they receive a school lunch, free of charge school enrollment, and we're also bringing new projects to communities that live in extreme poverty. We are increasing production of grain in the first and second sowing, with more than 1.5 million technological grants being given to producers who now are receiving seeds and fertilizer free of charge. Furthermore, we are providing mortgages for homes and farming credits at the lowest interest rates we've ever seen in the history of Honduras. And we are also setting up rural community banks. We are rescuing the National Electric Energy Company the Honduran Agricultural Market Institute, and the National Body for Basic Products, the Banasupro. All of these institutions I just mentioned were privatized and were abandoned for the 12 years of the narco dictatorship. Today, we are benefiting more than 800,000 families who now receive free energy, and we are subsidizing the cost of fuel in order to benefit all of the consumers of Honduras with the lowest prices in Central America. There's a reduction of 10 lempiras for each gallon of fuel sold. Investment in infrastructure is at its highest level in the history of our country. We've recovered the public sector with the historic approval of projects to build 8 hospitals, to repair thousands of schools, 3 national airports, the building of motorways, bridges, intermunicipal paths, multi-sport centres for the whole of the country. And we have also refurbished the 2 largest national stadia. I must also mention the biggest project and the most ambitious project in the history of Honduras, which is the plan to build a railway between the 2 oceans. It will go from Puerto Castilla on the Atlantic coast to Puerto de Amapala on the Pacific Ocean. Over the last 2 years and 8 months, we have reduced poverty by 12%. And with the plan to deal with crime, confirmed by the Secretary for Security with the cooperation of the armed forces, we're seeing an historic reduction of 15 points in the murder rate, which is the largest reduction that we've seen over the last 20 years. My Zero Deforestation program for 2030 has achieved historic results in the conservation of protected areas of Honduras's forests and rivers. The use of public funds in the state single account in an honest and patriotic way is being done in order to benefit the people of Honduras. People of the world, I wish to raise my voice to speak out regarding the murder of Juan Lopez, a social leader and politician who constantly called out the exploitative, extractive model. I absolutely condemn this vile murder. I have ordered the use of the full force of law enforcement and the justice system in order to investigate, to identify, capture, and to prosecute the intellectual and material perpetrators of this crime. I extend my solidarity to his family, to his colleagues, and to his friends. I am the pro tempore president of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States, CELAC. We're 33 different countries there. As president of Honduras, my first action was to call out and condemn the genocide against the Palestinian people. Already, more than 40,000 innocent people have been murdered by bombing. And in response to that, some countries have remained silent. I also must raise my voice and call for an end to this genocide. Lebanon must not become another Gaza Strip. We demand an immediate ceasefire in Lebanon. The Haitian people are calling for our cooperation and solidarity as an organization of countries in the Latin America and the Caribbean. Haiti is the first motherland to have been freed from colonialism, and it deserves our full attention. And so, in the next few days, I will convene the presidents that make up CELAC to show our commitment to Haiti. This General Assembly, for more than 30 years, with an overwhelming majority, has rejected the inhumane embargo imposed against the people of Cuba. This terrible embargo begun in 1960, and since 1992, this General Assembly has sent out more than 30 resolutions calling for the United States to put an end to this cruel embargo. I also call for an end to the unfair blockade imposed against the kindred peoples of Nicaragua and Venezuela. We also call for Cuba to be removed from the list of terrorist countries. Yesterday, I delivered to the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, the agreement that formalizes the UN support to fight against corruption and impunity. I thank this Assembly who approved our request to create this mechanism in order to combat public and private corruption. As Berta Cáceres, our martyr, said, she was a brave woman and a defender of our natural resources and of our indigenous peoples. Let us wake up, humanity. We still have time. May this be the appeal and the motto of our generation. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Honduras. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Joseph Numa Boakai, Sr., President of the Republic of Liberia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
His Excellency, Herman Yagan, President of the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, Ambassadors, Heads of Delegations, and esteemed delegates, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to address the 79th regular session of the United Nations General Assembly for the first time as President on behalf of the government and people of Liberia after a smooth back-to-back democratic transition. Liberia congratulates His Excellency Philemon Yagan on his election as President of the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly. You can be assured of Liberia's support as you steer the affairs of the General Assembly. I extol His Excellency Dennis Francis for his astute leadership during his presidency of the 78th session of the General Assembly and commend his determination to inspire and rekindle hope globally. I deeply thank Secretary General Antonio Guterres for the remarkable and visionary leadership he continues to provide in pursuit of our collective mandate. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, in the summer of 1945, Liberia joined other nations in San Francisco as one of the original signatories to the United Nations Charter. On that fatal day, the world, having suffered the scourge of war, was full of hope and determined to reverse the past. Nearly 80 years on, and reflecting on the preamble of the United Nations Charter, which declares our commitment to promote social progress and better standard of life and larger freedom, we ask the question, has our reaffirmation of faith in the dignity and worth of human person made 8 decades ago, had been realized? We must admit that the world has changed and the frontiers that we now embrace are different. In it, greed, insensitivity to the poor, the international drug epidemic, money laundering, dynamics of climate change, and the impact of social media must compel us to rethink our approach to global peace and security. Our beloved United Nations must undergo the institutional and philosophical reflections required to respond to the new age. As we assemble under this theme, unity in diversity for advancement of peace, sustainable development, and human dignity for everyone, everywhere, it is important to recognize the shared values and collective efforts that come from our unity with diversity. We must acknowledge these as essential for the advancement of peace, sustainable development, and the inherent dignity of every human being worldwide. By doing so, we can build a better world where no one is left behind. Like many nations gathered at this assembly, Liberia recommits to the Sustainable Development Goals. Since the end of the country's conflict, we have strived to follow a development path that will lead to building a capable state. 12 years ago, we dared to dream of a future within the realm of possibility, harboring core national aspirations transform the future. Name Liberia Rising or Vision 2030. It has been the driving force behind all of our planning efforts. The building of blocks and the tenets of Vision 2030 are significantly aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals. Our government's arrest agenda is a comprehensive approach developed to address the economic and social needs of millions of Liberians, especially the youth, who account for 60% of our population. With emphasis on agriculture, roads, infrastructure, development, justice, and the rule of law, education, sanitation, health, and tourism, the agenda has mainstreamed the SDGs as is designed to take Liberia to the finish line of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. The fight against poverty, the promotion of human dignity, a steadfast commitment. Despite our progress, poverty remains a significant challenge with over half of our population living below the poverty line. The Sustainable Development Goals aim to eradicate poverty in all forms by 2030, ensure social protection for the poor and vulnerable, improve the access to essential services. Liberia is dedicated to assessing the levels and the causes of poverty and implementing strategies to reduce it and promote shared prosperity. My government also acknowledges present need to address maternal and newborn mortality by implementing robust monitoring and evaluation of health services in the country to accelerate the reduction of maternal and newborn mortality. We are particularly blessed and pleased with the United Nations HC Joint Mission to Liberia this year, which concluded a commitment to combat the high burden of increasing newborn deaths. We welcome the United Nations General Assembly's decision to declare July 25th as the International Day of Women and Girls of African Descent this year. This significant milestone acknowledges that women and girls of African descent have unique opportunities, but they also have challenges that the global fight against slavery and racism is necessary to achieve gender equality. Liberia credits its credentials by producing the first woman president of the United Nations General Assembly, Angie Brooks Randall, and first female president of Africa, President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Liberia has witnessed and continues to witness the immense contribution of women and girls of African descent in politics, culture, and every area of societal development. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Liberia has enjoyed uninterrupted peace for almost 2 decades, following the 14 years of civil conflict. During this time, we have held 4 democratic elections, with last year's election marking the 4th since the return to democratic order in 2006. In January this year, Liberia achieved a historic milestone by peacefully transitioning from one democratic government to the other. This progress is significant because before the 2018 transition, the last democratic transition occurred in 1944, about 74 years earlier. We are gradually fostering and solidifying our democratic culture, ensuring that democracy is here to stay in Liberia. Now it is time for our people to reap the democratic dividends. The rule of law is fundamental for peace, justice, strong institution, and dignity for a human person. Liberia is taking significant strides towards openness, transparency, accountability by empowering and supporting transparent institutions. Our government is committed to implementing audit recommendations by the General Audit Commission to restore public and donors' confidence in the governance system and improve regional and international cooperation. In addition, the country has taken a major step in confronting its conflict past to ensure accountability and justice for crimes and other human rights violations committed during the war, and promote healing and national reconciliation. A significant development in our transitional justice process was the signing on May 2, 2024, of the Executive Order 131 to create the Office of Establishment of War and Economic Crime Court for Liberia, a key recommendation from the Truth and Reconciliation process in Liberia. Our actions align with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, joint follow-up on impunity, and past human rights violations. As we embark on the process and acknowledge the enormity of the task, my government seeks the support of the United Nations, partners, stakeholders in the pursuit of justice for victims, peace, and reconciliation. Liberia is facing a drug crisis that is affecting our youth and jeopardizing the country's future. This epidemic, driven by international criminal enterprises and their networks, poses a severe threat. In response, we have not only declared the drug epidemic a health emergency and a national security threat, but we have also been taking steps to address this issue by establishing a dedicated national body to tackle drug abuse in Liberia. I urge international community to join Liberia in addressing this escalating drug crisis. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the world is facing numerous crises, including global threats such as disease, security, and climate change, as well as food and resource shortages. Our vulnerabilities are evident, and we need to use a collective knowledge to find solutions that will preserve the planet for future generations. Climate change is undeniably real, and its threat to our environment and the way of life is becoming increasingly apparent. We must take urgent action to address this threat, including cooperative efforts to implement Article 6.2 of the Paris Agreement. Liberia, as the most forested country in West Africa, with over half of the land covered by forests, plays a vital role in biodiversity and environmental sustainability. As a result, our country is taking important steps to lead conversation on climate action. My government has called on our legislators and stakeholders to begin looking at the Paris Agreement, particularly under Article 6, to help advance actions towards establishing Liberia's nationally determined contribution to combat climate change. While we take these actions, we are mindful of the need to build capacity and invest in critical areas of our economy, such as using alternative financing for investment in the blue and green economy and technological transfer to support these climate actions. Excellencies, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the goal we set for ourselves and the future are better served on the foundation of peace and security. Having enjoyed peace for over 2 decades following a long-running conflict, we aim to promote peace and stability at home, in the region, and globally. The threat of conflict to our shared world underscores the importance of collaborative efforts to foster regional and global stability and peace. Therefore, we support all the UN's effort to address peace and security issues worldwide. Liberia is concerned about escalating security challenges in the West African region, including terrorism and economic and political instability. These pose significant threat to regional peace. So we urge full dialogue and cooperation among West African nations to address these issues effectively. Meanwhile, Liberia firmly stands with the rest of West Africa in the resolve to maintain our 50-year-old Regional Economic Commission, ECOWAS, intact. We oppose efforts to disintegrate our union and will not accept the region being used for proxy conflicts. We look at the AU and the UN to support us in keeping the regional body united. Similarly, at the global level, we call for an immediate ceasefire in the Middle East to provide civilians an essential humanitarian relief. We urge both Israel and the Palestinians to engage in negotiations towards lasting peace, including a two-state solution. Additionally, we see the ongoing conflict in the Ukraine as a threat to global peace and security. Therefore, there is an urgent need for a peaceful resolution that also respects Ukraine's territorial integrity. Mr. President, Excellency, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, this year's assembly is a pivotal moment for Liberia's bid to ascend to the African non-permanent seat of the United Nations Security Council 2026. We have proudly announced our candidacy. We look forward to the support of the member states to vote Liberia overwhelmingly to the seat of the Security Council. We can work with council members to promote peace, justice, and security. Liberia is dedicated to promoting sustainable growth and ensuring human dignity for all. Liberia is prepared to work together with the United Nations and global allies and international community to accomplish the sustainable development goals, establish a fair, peaceful, and sustainable world. The commitment to unity is deeply ingrained in Liberia's history as a founding member of the United Nations and the post-war international institutions, as well as region and sub-regional organizations. It also affirms our strong belief in multilateralism and international rules and based world built on shared values and principles are crucial to the future. The future of a more peaceful, prosperous, sustainable world must be all-encompassing, fair, and dignified for everyone worldwide. One United Nations, one world. Thank you, and thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Liberia. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency,